Hey guys, it's Cash, and today we're going to be reviewing and talking about The Winter King by Bernard Cornwell. This is book one of the Warlord Chronicles, and how I'm planning to do this video is mostly non-spoiler with a bit of spoiler talk at the end of this video. The non-spoiler I'll be breaking up into different areas to talk about, and then for the spoiler discussion, I'm going to do some of my favorite moments throughout the book. So let's just get into it with the first section being the plot. And I'll start by reading a little synopsis if you don't know what this book is about. This is just right off of Google, but pretty much in this, I don't think the spoiler in this is anything you wouldn't know about if you were picking up the book to read. A former warrior sworn to Arthur, and now an elderly monk, Dervel, tells the story of how Arthur became a warlord in Dark Age Britain despite illegitimacy to the throne. After being banished to Amorca by his father, the High King Uther Pendragon, Arthur returns to protect the new king, his infant nephew, Mordred. And I apologize if I mispronounce any of these names because there are a few of these are out there, but I believe the main character is Dervel. Dervel, I think that is how you say it, so that is what I am going with. It's a frame narrative where the main character is actually writing this down. He's telling the story to somebody else, which, at first worries me because, well, I know he survives, right? Also, all of this, dramatic things that are happening. I know the main character survives, but that doesn't matter because it is so well written that I was still on the edge of my seat through the entire book. Um, as I mentioned, it's the narrator is a man named Dervel. I believe that is how you say it, even though it's spelled with an F. I think that makes a V sound there. He ends up being a loyal warrior to Arthur, and we pretty much are seeing this whole tale through his eyes and words, because, like I said, he is writing it down. He is telling the story to somebody else. We do see glimpses of the present time as Dervel, as an elderly man, and I won't say the situation he's in this section. In the spoiler section, I will, but it's very interesting where he ends up, um, which is also keeps me reading. So I'm like, well, what the hell? Like, he's definitely an entirely different person at the end of this thing than he is uh, in the time that he's writing about and talking about. So I'm like, okay, so how does he get there? The plot is very coherent. There's no wasted lines. It's about 400 and I think 30 some odd pages, and every single one matters. There was never a time where I felt myself reading it like, okay, why are we still here? Why are these two people still talking? Everything mattered. Every piece of dialogue was great. Everything fit. It was like a perfect puzzle. Every piece fit together perfectly. Um, Also, it was very clear on who the villains would be in this first book, and what I also really enjoyed is some other people were introduced to keep the drama going forward. Like, okay, yeah, we handled the villains here in book one, but there's definitely much bigger and badder things on the horizon, and I'm assuming in book two and book three. So can't wait to get to that. Um, Overall, to get into it, the for the plot wise, it did not take me long. I would say probably within 10 pages, getting past the first little initial like where are we, what's going on. From the first 10 pages and then on, I was hooked. uh, and I finished it in about a week of consistent reading. It only took me about a week to read this story. Now, without getting into too much spoilers just yet, I want to talk about the characters. First off, like I said, Dervel, the main character, narrator of our frame story. Um, and honestly, he is one of my favorite characters that I have come across so far in my, reading thus far. Um, while the story is a retelling of Arthur and it's all things about Arthur, we're definitely following Dervel's life and his impact on this world. And I think that is just awesome. Um, Cornwell does a good job of letting the audience react through Dervel because a lot of his actions, a lot of his mistakes, a lot of the things he does, I felt like they were the things I would do, He felt he was a really well put together character. Things that happened to him, I felt for him. I felt like I could sympathize with him. I feel like I've lived the emotions he's felt before. Um, like I said, the mistakes he makes are understandable, but so he's definitely not a Mary Sue main character. He goes through the ringer time and time again, and like I said, he is one of my favorites in fantasy. Um, then moving to Arthur, the guy this whole trilogy is based around, his whole life. Uh, what I find most interesting about Arthur is that while yeah, the book's about him. These stories are all about him. There's a lot of time where he's really not on the page. He's really, fighting somewhere else on a whole other part of the country, doing his own battles. But every time he does pop up, he pops off the page, and everyone's like, okay, I want to fight for that guy. Cornwell does this great thing where, what are we going to do? Everything seems so dim and glim, and Arthur shows up, and oh wow, you start talking to this guy and you start feeling a little bit of hope. You're like, okay, well, maybe we can do this. um However, there is a spoiler section towards the end of this video, and I'll talk more because there is something about Arthur that I don't like about him. But hey, no one's perfect, no one's infallible, and he definitely makes a big mistake in this. But it was a mistake where I'm like, okay, well, we had to do something here, or else the story could have got solved in about 150 pages. So I do get and understand why it happened, but almost like, oh, I just wanted to shake him, just wanted to shake Arthur. Um, Speaking of people who are not on the page a lot, Merlin in this is really not in this first book much at all. I'm sure if you put together the pages he's on, it would be probably a dozen, maybe 2 dozen pages. But what is very cool about him and Merlin, because when you think of Merlin, you think of magic, and how Cornwell handles the magic. It's in this way where, is it magic? Is it religion? Is it just people really believing in it so it looks real? Or is it real? It's kind of left up to the reader to decide. I like to think it's real because, why not? Magic's cool. But it is very up to you, because things happen and you're like, well, did that happen? Was that magical, or were they just really scared? You know, the power of the mind is, a hell of a thing, and I think that is what Cornwell is talking about when he discusses some of the magical elements in this story and how people react to it, and the curses that the druids and priestesses are throwing at each other and how people respond to it. Um, it's very interesting, but hey, maybe they are actually being cursed, right? That's the beautiful thing. Up next is Nimue. I believe that's how you say her name, Nimue. She is Merlin's priestess and lover. Um, and honestly, I love her character so much because in this, she is a bit of a parallel to Dervell. As Dervell grows, we see Nimue grow. Well, maybe grow is not the best phrase for her, but you definitely see her character develop throughout the Winter King from beginning to end. Um, so as Dervell grows into this warrior, Nimue becomes this badass druid, and I love the parallels between their characters, and their relationship in general is one of my favorites that I've read so far. Now let's move to Morgan, Arthur's sister, and to be honest, she did not really do it for me in this book. I think because of Nimue, I loved her character so much that Morgan kind of took a back seat to her. Um, beyond that, I really can't say why she wasn't super attention grabbing. It's still Morgan Le Fay. She's still an iconic character, but just Nimue did it so much more for me that Morgan's cool. I still really like her, and I hope she does more things in book 2 and 3. But in book 1, I'm like, yeah, she's cool, but whatever. Uh, Lancelot, I'm going to talk about him in this section because, he's honestly probably the most well-written character uh, that Bernard Cornwell put together in this book because he invoked the strongest emotion out of me, out of any character. He brought out the strongest emotion out of me, and that would be hatred. I fucking hate this guy. He's such an asshole, and yes, everybody says that it's nothing new, but my god, it has to be talked about. It can never be talked about enough. This guy is such a giant prick. I'll talk more about that in the spoiler section, but I just had to say that here. You'll love to hate him. Galahad, on the other hand, is Lancelot's brother in this, and he must have got all the brave and courageous genes in that family in this tale because he is the direct opposite of Lancelot. He's both a badass fighter and you just love his personality. He's one of my favorites in this story so far. Hopefully, he sticks around. And then the last person I'll talk about here is Sagramore, and I wanted to talk about him real quick because he is actually my favorite character in book 1. Every time he was popping up on the page, badass shit was going on. He's a sick fighter. He does all kinds of cool things, and everything he says just sounds sick. He has nothing but great lines. I'm telling you, nothing but great lines and great advice. All right, the next section I'll talk about is the setting, and I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce a lot of these names because they're out there. But Cornwell definitely did a lot of research into Old Britain when he put together this story. The world building is interesting because a lot of it is based off of real life places, but he does a great job of describing the land that you definitely get a feel of when Dervell is in his home area, in his home country, compared to when he's traveling, going to different parts of the country, different lands, and how unknown it is to him. And the sense of wonder he gets from seeing things for the first time, you can feel as a reader. And I think that is really cool. Um, it was almost becoming, when he would travel and to new lands, the description became more vague, and it was a sense of wonder because you were experiencing it for the first time with him. Really well done. Um, Cornwell also does a great job of describing the different kingdoms and where they are on the map compared to one another, how the allies work together, why they work together, the geography of the region. He does a great job in all of that. Two thumbs up as far as the setting and world building is concerned for this story. Next thing up I want to talk about is the pacing. The pacing, it can be a bit jarring at times. It took me a few pages, a few dozen pages to get used to it because you'll just be reading one paragraph, it'll end, next paragraph, time jump, no warning, no anything. You're like, oh, what the hell? Did a few weeks go by? Did a few hours go by? Did a few days go by? It took a little bit to get used to. But once you get used to it and you start really paying attention, it's beautiful. It is so magnificent. Because he does these things where, time will pass rapidly, but then how he zooms back into a certain scene or a certain moment of time, it's just really well done. And once it took me probably, I don't know, 50 pages or so to get used to it. But once I did, it didn't mess with me at all. I really enjoyed it, actually. Last thing to discuss and talk about before I get into the spoiler section is, will I keep going with the series? Absolutely. This is a two thumbs up. I absolutely loved it. I already own the entire series on my Kindle. I'm doing it digitally. And, I expect to start Enemy God either at the end of this month or towards the beginning of February. This was one of my priority series to finish this year, and I am very confident that I will be able to get it done. Um, I guess I can give the ranking here before I get into the spoiler section. I will get this gets a 4 out of 5 for me. Winter King gets a 4 out of 5 stars or an 8 out of 10. I will do both types of ratings, 4 out of 5 or an 8 out of 10 for Winter King for me. All right, now we're going to get into the spoiler section of this video. So that is your warning, spoiler warning. If you have not read the book, uh, this is your warning. At this point going forward, we're talking about spoilers and how I'm going to do it. I'm not going to sit here and tell you, page by page, give you the spark notes. Not going to do any of that. Really going to talk about the moments that mostly stick out to me. I will go through each part for this video. There were 5 parts for The Winter King, so we'll talk about each one and my favorite moments in each, starting with part 1, A Child in Winter. The entire first part of the book takes place at Merlin's Keep. It's where Dervell, our main character and narrator, grew up, where the story begins and kind of takes place through that whole part 1. Um, my second favorite scene in this part would be the war council, war room meeting between most of Britain's rulers, where they decide the future of the kingdom. Where the Pendragon Uther says that Mordred is to be protected at all costs, no matter what. Um, the whole scene is pretty awesome. Does a good job of setting up the events for the rest of the book. Also does a good job of showing how much Uther did not want Arthur to be around, and part of it was his wish that Arthur stayed away. I thought that was very interesting because he blamed him for his son's death. Well, so Arthur being his bastard, Uther blamed Arthur for his legitimate son Mordred's death, and now I think his grandson, right? His grandson now, they also named Mordred. Now the whole war council meeting to decide on who's going to protect him and everything. That whole scene was incredible. Then, of course, the highlight of the part is when after Uther passes away, after he dies from old age, and Gundelius betrays Norwina and attacks Mordred. He thinks he kills Mordred, but it's the whole bait and switch. That whole thing was awesome. The description of slaughter that happens at Merlin's place. Again, Merlin is missing at this point. That whole reveal, probably should have said that earlier. Merlin is missing. No one knows where Merlin is. So again, I'm not going to attempt to pronounce this place, but Merlin's Keep, if you will, where Dervell and Nimue and everyone grew up. Gunvalius and Gorvithid, King Gorvithid, I think that is how you say his name. They attack, kill Norwina. They think they kill Mordred, but there's a whole trickery with that. Um, the escape sequence and chasing that follows, where Dervel gets his first kill in that ambush on the trail where he becomes a man. That whole thing was beautiful, I thought. You could really feel his anxiety when he's waiting to jump out um, to ambush those two soldiers. Those were my favorite moments in part one. Part two, The Princess Bride. While I enjoyed this whole book, I gave it a 4 out of 5. This one is probably my least favorite of the 5 parts. We see Derville continue to grow as a warrior under Owen, um, which is really cool. You know, at first I was like, wow, Owen, he's a really cool guy. Well, um, we see the morality of Derville that I was talking about earlier and why he's one of my favorites, because he is absolutely traumatized by what Owen makes him and the other men do when they attack that at Tin Miners Camp and slaughter damn near everybody. At least they think everybody. But, you know, a survivor, someone survives, goes back and tells the tale, and it actually leads to Owen being accused of everything. Um, it, the whole fight scene between Arthur and Owen I thought was pretty sick, because it was the callback. Owen was talking shit to Dervell, saying, yeah, Arthur is cool and all, but he's all hype. He's not a great fighter. It's all mind games. He just haymaker slash slash slash. He doesn't jab jab. He doesn't stab at all. Well, Owen learned real quick, because that's exactly what Arthur did to kill him in a court of swords. And then also, this is the part where Arthur messes everything up. I said earlier, really, if this didn't happen, the whole book could have been finished in about 150 pages. But when uh, peace is within everyone's grasp, Arthur comes up with a perfect plan for peace to happen, and then Guinevere walks in and ruins the whole thing, because now Arthur's in love and he's going to marry Guinevere instead of King Gorvithid's daughter. And now Gorvithid feels betrayed, and it's an insult to his daughter. And now there's new life to the war. Part three is called The Return of Merlin, so they just give it away, don't they? The Return of Merlin. There is a time jump right at the beginning of this part where I believe 2 years have gone by since the end of part two. So 2 years of fighting in Britain. During the time, Dervel has become a great warrior, and he received the nickname Cadarn, which means the mighty. So he's now Dervel Cadarn. He is also, at this time, initiated into a secret religion of badass warriors. He was initiated by Sagramore. Becomes a worshiper of Minthros. I think it is Minthros, that's how you say it. At this time, word comes from Bendwick, which is a kingdom Arthur was sworn to before being sworn to Mordred, funny enough. Word comes from Bendwick that the Franks are invading, they're getting surrounded, and they need Arthur to return back home, not back home, but back there to fulfill his part in his oath and fight for them, fight for Benwick. Arthur says, hell nah, I'm way too busy, but he sends Dervell and 60 men in his place to go get the job done. Derville goes and travels to Benwick, and is there where we meet King Bon, who shows him the great library that he owns. And it's there where we meet Father Kelwin, who's just this grouchy old, scruffy old man, constantly studying in the library, has a hunchback, classic librarian type of deal. We meet Lancelot at dinner, and right away he's just a giant prick. Dervell starts, he just keeps calling Dervell a child. He's like, do it one more time and I'm gonna fucking kill you. He's like, child. No hesitation. Dervell stands up, starts wailing on him, beating the hell out of him, and it's actually Galahad that splits them up and brings the peace back to the dinner party. He tells him, hey, you should probably leave, because Lancelot will try to kill you in your sleep, so you should probably get out of here and go back to your men for the night. Um, and then he actually joins. Galahad actually joins Dervell with his men, and they spend about 3 years, another time jump, they spend 3 years fighting the Franks in Benwick before they're pushed all the way back to the capital. Um, they're pushed all the way back to the capital, and it ends up being a several months long siege. The siege scene was really well done and sick. It was one of my favorites. The city eventually falls, of course, but there are lots of dead Franks as a result of Dervell and his men. Um, for whatever reason, again, is it magical or is it just Dervell's conscience here? But he feels compelled to return to the palace and attempt to rescue King Bon and Father Kelwin. Bon doesn't listen to him and gets killed by the Franks right away. Cowan turns out to be Merlin in disguise. Yep, you heard that right. It's Merlin. I did not see this coming, and for this first time Merlin pops up, didn't bother me at all. I thought it was really well done. I was like, oh wow, it was right in front of me. Cornwell, you sneaky bastard, you got me. Really enjoyed it. Dervell returns back home with Galahad and Merlin and goes back to Arthur's service. But he also learns Nimue has gone mad in the time he was gone and was sent to the Isle of the Dead, which is what part 4 is called, the Isle of the Dead. Um, the entire sequence there at the Isle of the Dead was awesome. The randomness of it kept me on the edge of my seat the entire time. When he was having lunch with that one guy who said he was like a former lord, they were eating the biscuit or whatever, and then he tries to stab Dervell right when he turns his back. That was amazing. Didn't enjoy it. Enjoyed the hell. Didn't see it coming, and I enjoyed the hell out of it. Of course, he rescues Nimue from there, and the whole lover scene. I was like, okay, yeah, this was needed, and it was also how I felt for Dervell here because this is where he learns that Nimue will never be the woman for him, and you just feel bad for him. Um, we get to meet Aella, the Saxon king, for the first time in this part, and Arthur is able to pay him off a few months of peace so he can fight the more pressing war at this time. And Cornwell does a really good job of setting Aella up as a future bad guy, and I'm sure he will be popping up in the next 2 books. Um, the War Council in this part I did not enjoy as much as part 1, but it was still really cool. Uh, when this is one of my complaints now, when Galahad and Dervell were sent to Gorvithid's court to try and speak of peace, and they find out Dervell's there and he's going to get killed, they're like, oh, that's Arthur's sworn man, get him. And Merlin just happens to be there and walk on in. It felt a bit Deus Ex Merlin, if you will. And this happens one other time in the story, and I'm like, okay, hopefully that trend doesn't keep going. Like, oh, what are we going to do here? And Merlin comes in to save the day. But funny enough, on the flip side of that, my favorite moment in the entire book is at the end of this part. It's when Arthur takes Dervell and Sagamore into the forest and talks about attacking on their own because their allies aren't going to help them. And everything in those few pages I absolutely loved. Some of my favorite lines and quotes in just a few short pages. Every piece of dialogue took my breath away. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. All right, finally, part 5, the Shield Wall. And this entire part is kind of just one giant fight scene between Arthur's army and King Gorvithid's army, and Gundlius and all the other kingdoms that are partnered with the bad guys in this. Um, Again, even though we know Dervell survives, I don't know who else survives, so I'm like, oh my god, are my favorites going to live? Is everything going to work out okay? It does, and that was awesome. Uh, but again, when things look completely out of hand and things are going bad for the good guys and Gorvithid has them surrounded, who shows up? Merlin. And oh, what do you know? He saves the day, talks to the Irish. Deus Ex Merlin comes in, saves the day, turns the tide of the battle, and Arthur is able to win the day and defeat Gorvithid. And again, what the hell? Please, like Merlin's awesome, but can we start winning in some other ways? And I understand he's constantly gone, so when he pops up, it's a big deal. But it kind of makes me feel a type of way when it keeps happening to save the good guys at the end of the day. I understand it makes him look mysterious and mighty, but hopefully that changes a little bit in book 2 and 3. And also the ending of this book with Nimue, Tanabers, Gundlius, Derville, and the temple felt like it ended sort of abruptly. Again, nothing wrong with it because there are 2 more books. I just wish there was about 10 more pages of conclusion afterwards. But yeah, that was The Winter King, my first ever review and discussion on this channel. Sorry if it's a bit muddled and sloppy in some parts. I hope to get better at it, as I get used to this whole YouTube thing. But hopefully you will see my progression and hopefully I get better. Um, if you want to see my journey, feel free to subscribe. If you want to support this video, please drop a like. And if you've read The Winter King and want to talk about it, let me know what you thought in the comments. Until next time, see ya.